Hello friend, this is the first lecture of polity and in this lecture we will learn about introduction. The term polity or governance is derived by British scholars from the Greek word politia, and the term politia was itself derived by earlier Greek scholars Plato and Aristotle. And Plato and Aristotle derived the term politia from the Greek term polis, and polis means state. So originally there was Greek term polis, which means state. So Plato and Aristotle derived another word politia, and from politia, British scholars derived the term polity. Aristotle elaborated on the topics and thinking of the ideal state, slavery, revolution, education, citizenship, form of government, theory of constitution, and many more. And because of his contribution to the governance, Aristotle is called the father of political science. And as the as the modern concept of polity is derived from Western world, so uh, we will learn the introduction of polity with respect to Western world. Evolution of polity. In starting, there was religious governance. The country was governed by the religion, and over the time, the religious governance changed into secular governance. And this change happened because of many scholars. So we will see the contribution of different scholars in this slide. In in the year 1054, there was great schism, and because of this schism there was division in church. One is Eastern Orthodoxy Church and another one was Catholic churches. Then a scholar named Martin Luther of German, he criticized Catholic churches in 16th century, and because of Martin Luther there was a start of Protestant church or Protestant states. Then another scholar named John Locke of Britain, or British scholar John Locke. He is considered as father of liberalism because he gave the concept that state with religion will fight religious war. So he was trying to separate the religion and the political governance. Then next scholar was Montesquieu. Montesquieu was French scholar, and he defined executive, legislative, and judicial organs of state and gave the concept of separation of power in his book The Spirit of Law. So, so it was Montesquieu who gave the modern concept of separation of power between three different organs of governance. One is executive, another one is legislative, and the third one is judicial. Then a next scholar was Thomas Jefferson of US, and he gave the concept of separation of church and state. He tried to separate the religion and governance. Then next scholar was Karl Marx of German. He gave the concept of communism. Now, what is communism? We will see in next slide. In next slide. Then another scholar was A.V. Dicey. A.V. Dicey of Britain. He gave the concept of rule of law. Here is the map. Map of Europe, and in the left hand side map you can see the year mentioned 1054 when the great schism happened. So in the year 1054 the church divided into two different churches. One is Catholic Church and another one is Eastern Orthodox churches. Then in 16th century there was another division, and there was three kind of churches. One is Eastern Orthodox Church, then Catholic Church, and then Protestant Church. And in the right hand side map, in the right hand side map you can see the France, Germany, Italy, Spain were Catholic follower, and in Britain, Norway, and Sweden you will find Protestant churches. So there was division in churches, and over the time The religious law was replaced by secular governance. Polity. Polity is a process of governance by collective group of peoples or entities. And the component of polity are governing structure, mainly legislative and executive, then governing policy, derived by governing structure, then governing documents. In governing documents, there are constitution, acts, and rules and notifications, and these were issued by governing structure. And the fourth component of polity is check and balances. In this component you will find judiciary, investigation agency, and press. And press is also considered as fourth pillar of democracy. The check and balance system is to limit the power of governing structure. Uh, it restricts the governing structure uh, uh, from changing to it restrict the governing structure. It put restriction on the power of governing structure, and it stopped transforming of governing structure into dictators governance in dictatorship. Components of polity. With the rise of society, governing structure came into picture, and over time, some governing structures codified the governance method in the form of constitution for stable rule, while other governing structures continued to rule without a written constitution. So, and those who wrote down a constitution for governance, they restructure the governance system based on the written constitution. Also, it is the governing structure that established the system of check and balances and led down the governing policy from time to time. The three pillar of governance: legislative, executive, and judiciary. And there was separation of power between among these three pillars, and the concept of separation of power among these three pillars was given by French scholar Montesquieu. So there is governing structure, and the governing structure draft governing documents like constitution, acts, rules, notification, etc. And based on these documents, new governing structure was formed by current governing structure. And it was the duty of governing structure to stabilize the system of check and balances. And they from time to time the governing structure laid down the governing policy. Type of governance. Based on the role of citizens, the governance is divided into three broad categories: communist, authoritarian, and democratic. But in earlier time, there was uh, different kind of rule. So here is the different kind of governance listed in this slide. First one is theocracy. Theocracy is rule of God, or a rule by human incarnation of God. Then another one was nucracy. Nucracy was rule by the wise, or rule by the scholars. Then democracy. Democracy is rule by property owners. Only property owners can participate in governance. Then another one was aristocracy. In aristocracy, power was in the hand of a small privileged ruling class. Um, and the privileged ruling class, and these ruling class were known as aristocrats. And generally, the aristocrats consider themselves above the law. Then another form was oligarchy. Oligarchy was corrupt form of aristocracy. In oligarchy, power rests with a small number of people, and again they were considered themselves above the law. Then plutocracy. And plutocracy is part of oligarchy, and it is advanced form of democracy. In this form, society is ruled by people of great wealth or income. Then next is autocratic. In autocratic, power over a state is concentrated in the hands of one person, or absolute monarchy. Then kleptocracy. In kleptocracy, the power was controlled by corrupt leaders or kleptocrat. Then clitarchy, the power was controlled by strong people. Then critarchy. In critarchy, governmental and the legal system are constitutionally. In critarchy, governmental and the legal system are constitutionally intertwined. Then next one is stratocracy. In this form of government, it was headed by military chief. Then ergatocracy. In ergatocracy, rule of proletariat, or it is another term for communism. Then technocracy. In technocracy, the power or rule is done by educated or technical experts people. In this introduction lecture, we will learn the two pillar of governance. One is governing structure and another one is governing document. Regarding governing structure, the first one is communism. The word communist is Latin word, and it's mean of the community. Ownership of resource was held by community. The communism is classless egalitarian society without government. The governance is done by community, and it is defined as dictatorship of the proletariat. Proletariat means worker, and the concept of communism was given by Karl Marx. He made the concept of communism popular in Europe, and he gave the concept of communism based on industry or industrial communism. As the industrialization led to more inequality in the society, Marx popularized the concept of communism as a mean to end inequality in the society. He proposed the common ownership of the means of production. So Karl Marx, Karl Marx gave the concept that agriculture society developed into industrial society, and in industrial society there was higher inequality among people. So because of this inequality, a new society will emerge, and it will be communist society where everyone has equal ownership on resources. Then there was another person named Vladimir Lenin. He gave the concept that representative of community for governance purpose, because in communism there was no government, but it is not possible to govern a country without a government, only based on society. So Lenin gave the concept of representative of community for governance purpose. So according to Lenin, there was agriculture society which will develop into industrial society, and this industrial society will change into communist society led by representative. Then Vladimir Lenin was from Russia, and next to Russia there was country China, and in China there was lack of industry in 1950s. So the Mao Zedong, who was trying to bring communism in China, he gave the concept that even agriculture society can become communist society. He There is no need for industrial society and higher inequality. Even a agriculture society can change into communist society led by representative. So The concept of communism is different with the perspective of Karl Marx, Vladimir Lenin, and Mao Zedong. Next one is authoritarian governing structure. In authoritarian form, in authoritarian regime, authoritarian regimes have greater control over the public and private lives of their people. In authoritarian governance, power can be in single hand, basically dictator or a group of leaders. Dictatorship. In dictatorship, a single individual has gained power through force and everyone has to follow his policies. The dictatorship is similar to absolute monarchy, but dictatorship is more corrupt than absolute monarchy. Dictatorship is imposing political views on individuals, on citizens of the state. Then there is totalitarian. Then there is totalitarianism. In this more repressive than authoritarian authoritarian governance. And in this, not only political but personal views were also imposed on citizens. So the ruling people were trying to impose all views on citizens. Then democracy. In democracy, people have the authority to deliberate and decide legislation. Um, it was Abraham Lincoln who gave a definition, um, that is, democracy is a govern is a democracy is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. This line was given by Abraham Lincoln. In democracy there are two kind of democracy. One is direct democracy and another one is representative democracy. In direct democracy there are tools named referendum, initiative, and recall. And plebiscite is a kind of referendum held by the government on the strength of the right to self determination enjoyed by the section of people. Plebiscite can be held on only one issue, namely right to self determination. The outcome of plebiscite may or may not be legally binding on the government, since it has the potential to disturb the territorial integrity of a country. So, in direct democracy, there is referendum, initiative, and recall. In referendum, there was the views of citizens were asked directly. Then there was initiative. The citizen start making law. They initiate to make law. And recall is the method to call back the ruling people, and to call back the ruling people and to stabilize new governing structure. In representative democracy, uh, representatives are elected by the people to act in the people's interest. Uh, Representative democracy can be of two type. One is republic and another one is monarchy. In republic, the president was elected one. In monarchy, the king act as a president. Then there is another division of democracy, um, that is based on separation of power. One is parliamentary system and another one is presidential system. So, what is the difference between parliamentary system and presidential system? In parliamentary system, head of state was president in both the system, parliamentary and presidential system. But in parliamentary system, the head of government was is prime minister. But in presidential system, head of government is president. In parliamentary system, executive um, was drawn from legislative or parliament. There are dual executive. One is prime minister and another one is president. In presidential system, there was single executive and it was president, and minister were appointed by president. They were not drawn from parliament. They can be technical expert or any member. So in presidential form of government, there was separation of executive and legislative wing, as the ministers or executive were not drawn from parliament. Regarding executive accountability, as in parliamentary form of system, executive were drawn from parliament or legislature. So executive were responsible or accountable to legislature. But in presidential form of government, the executive were not accountable to legislature. Regarding executive power, uh, the parliamentary form of government can dissolve legislative wing, like Lok Sabha in India. But in presidential form of government, president cannot dissolve legislative wing. The tenure is not fixed in parliamentary form of system. In parliamentary form of system, there is rule of majority, the party who will get majority will rule. So there is no fixed tenure, but rule of majority prevail. But in presidential form of system, there was fixed tenure of president. He cannot remove based on majority rule. In parliamentary form of system, executive election was done directly or indirectly. For prime minister, there can be direct or indirect election, but in presidential form of governance or democracy, the president were generally elected by direct election. The parliamentary form of governance is less autocratic, whereas presidential form of governance is more autocratic. And the advantage of parliamentary form of governance is more responsible government, because people will not uh, because a party member can defeat to different party. But in presidential form of system, there is no such limitation. So we found more stable government in presidential form of system. Now the governing document, another pillar of governance. We will basically learn about constitution. Constitution is a comprehensive document or set of documents in case of UK and other countries, um, that describes state machinery and norms to be followed by the state. By describing the norm, it sets limitation on state as well as people governed by it, and avoid the anarchism. So it gives the rule of law in a territory or a region. In other words, constitution is a framework of polity for relationship between state and its people. Rule of law. Everyone is accountable to the same law. Aristotle led the philosophy, but the term rule of law was coined in the 16th century in Britain, and later A.V. Dicey made it popular in the 19th century. The constitution is non-static in nature. It is organic in nature. Means constitution can grow through amendments and other means. Basically, a lot of addition can be done in constitution. And constitution give details about governance. So another part of constitution is separation of power. The theory of separation of power was given by French philosopher and judge Montesquieu in his book The Spirit of Law in the 18th century. Regarding constitution, the first written constitution was American Constitution. It was written in 1793 AD. So this is all about introduction to polity, and this is the end of lecture. Thank you.